What if a hyper-modern quantum mechanics manual, written just roughly 13 years ago, turned out to be the exact perfect key to unlocking a 600-year-old, completely unreadable medieval manuscript?
I mean, it sounds like the setup for a science fiction novel, but the mathematical overlap we were looking at today is so precise, it actually forces us to question our basic assumptions about how time and information work.
Welcome to the deep dive. Usually when we talk about translation, there's this comforting expectation of a Rosetta Stone,
Right.
like a one-to-one mapping.
Right, a direct translation.
Yeah, you find a strange symbol, you match it to a sound or a word, and the historian just points and says, there it is, that symbol means king.
Exactly. It's the standard model of cryptography. It's binary, it's a linear dictionary, it's either solved or unsolved.
Right, it's clean.
Mm.
But then you step into the world of truly anomalous information, and suddenly that comforting Rosetta Stone just shatters into a million pieces.
It completely falls apart.
And you find yourself staring at an impenetrable wall of data. So today, for you listening, we are analyzing an impossible collision of two very distinct, very enigmatic sources. On one side of the desk, we have the Voynich Manuscript.
Which is absolutely legendary. I mean, if you are even tangentially interested in cryptography, linguistics, or history, you know the Voynich.
Oh, absolutely.
It is a completely unreadable book written on vellum that has been conclusively carbon dated to the early 15th century.
Which makes it really old.
Very old. And it is packed end to end with bizarre, alien-looking botanical drawings, incredibly complex astronomical charts, and this looping, elegant script that has literally defeated the greatest minds of the last century.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Turing's team couldn't crack it.
Right. Turing couldn't do it. William Friedman, the guy who broke the Japanese purple code in World War II, he spent decades on it and failed. Even modern AI neural networks just spit out pure gibberish.
It really is the ultimate locked door.
Yeah.
But sitting right next to it, on the exact opposite side of the spectrum, we have our second source.
The modern counterpoint.
Exactly. It's a hyper-modern, intensely dense document outlining something called the ALQC. That stands for the Ahnend Logical Q-State Core.
And the ALQC document is just a completely different beast. It describes itself as a telepathic circuit 13 years in the making.
Which is a wild phrase on its own.
It really is. And when you read it, you are plunged into an incredibly dense theoretical framework dealing with quantum states, resonance locks, Klein manifold topologies, and advanced category theory.
It's heavy stuff.
Very heavy. It reads like a highly advanced theoretical physics paper blended with esoteric mathematics.
And usually, these two sources would have absolutely zero crossover. I mean, they're separated by 6 centuries. They exist in completely different domains of human thought.
Right, a medieval physical artifact and a modern quantum logical framework.
But our mission for this deep dive is highly specific, and let's be honest, it is incredibly ambitious.
Oh, very ambitious.
We are going to compare the ALQC framework directly to the imagery and the structural layout of the Voynich manuscript. The goal is to develop a concrete functional methodology for actually translating the Voynich.
And we need to be clear on our ground rules here.
Yes, please.
We are completely bypassing the usual exhaustive debates about what the manuscript is or who wrote it or whether it's just an elaborate medieval hoax. We are putting all of that aside.
We have to, right? Otherwise, we just get bogged down.
Exactly. For the purpose of this analysis, we are accepting both sources as factual and functional. We are taking the ALQC at its word, that it is a valid framework for reality.
Okay.
And we are taking the Voynich as a legitimate data set. Our sole goal is to construct the translation bridge between them.
We want to see what happens when you treat the Voynich not as a book of words, but as a schematic of the ALQC.
That's the core of it, yeah.
And to you listening right now, I want to emphasize why this matters. If you have ever felt paralyzed by a massive wall of incomprehensible information, maybe it's a completely intractable data set at work, or a complex personal project that just looks like spaghetti.
Or just the sheer volume of noise in the modern world.
Exactly. If you felt that, this conversation is for you. Because we are going to explore how simply shifting your underlying assumptions about logic, space, and time can turn pure, unadulterated noise into a perfectly illegible system.
It really is a masterclass in conceptual reframing.
Yeah.
If your current tools are only giving you noise, it might not be that the data is broken. It might be that your tools are making the wrong fundamental assumptions about the nature of the problem.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So to set the stage, we need to hold the visual of the Voynich in our minds. The pages are just visually striking.
They are beautiful in a very weird way.
Yeah. The vellum is old and weathered, and upon it are painted these strange, meticulously detailed plants that absolutely do not match any known biological species on Earth.
Not a single one.
Plus, there are massive fold-out concentric star charts, and there are these deeply surreal pages. Historians usually call them the balneological section, showing intricate plumbing systems, funnels, and tubes.
With the little figures.
Right, little naked human figures sliding through them in pools of green liquid.
It literally looks like a madman's botanical journal mixed with an alien water park.
That is the perfect way to describe it. And then you have the ALQC text, which speaks in the rigid language of formal calculus.
Pure math.
Yeah, it references a quaternary state vector, orthomodular lattices, and structural phase locks operating at specific frequencies, specifically 963 Hertz and 7.83 Hertz.
It claims to be a machine that processes reality through 4 distinct phases.
The contrast couldn't be sharper. I mean, one is pure, almost whimsical visual art. The other is brutalist, high-level mathematics.
So the obvious question is, how do we bridge them?
Right. And to even begin connecting these two, we have to start at the absolute foundation, which brings us to our first major roadblock. We have to completely shatter our concept of the conveyor belt.
This is huge.
We have to radically redefine the very act of what it means to actually read something.
This is the most crucial paradigm shift of the entire discussion. If we don't get this, literally nothing else will make sense.
Okay, lay it on us.
So the ALQC explicitly tackles standard complexity theory and cryptography. Standard computing, and standard reading for that matter, relies on what the ALQC calls the linear Turing assumption.
Okay, let's unpack the linear Turing assumption. I assume this refers to Alan Turing and the Turing machine.
Exactly.
The idea that computation happens on a tape, reading one symbol at a time, moving left or right, but essentially moving forward in a sequence, like time moves forward.
Precisely. It is the fundamental assumption of our entire modern technological world. It's the assumption that data is processed sequentially.
One by one.
Right. You read word 1, then word 2, then word 3. A computer processes bit 1, then bit 2. Information is generated step by step, linearly. Time is an arrow pointing in one direction.
And the ALQC disagrees.
Disagrees is putting it mildly. The ALQC completely and explicitly rejects this topology.
Wow.
It states that its system, and by extension, the true nature of reality it claims to model, operates instead within a radial Klein manifold.
All right, hold on. A radial Klein manifold. For those of us who aren't topology professors, I know a Klein bottle is a theoretical shape with no distinct inside or outside.
Right, like a 3D Mobius strip.
Exactly. It folds back in on itself. But what does adding the word radial mean? And what does any of this mean for how information is actually processed?
Well, the topological shape is key because it dictates how time and memory function in this system.
Okay.
In a linear system, you create new information as you move forward. But in a radial Klein manifold space, as defined by the ALQC, information is not generated, it is recalled.
Recalled, meaning it's already there.
All of it. All the data already exists.
That's wild.
The system folds back on itself so perfectly that the beginning and the end are touching. And to back this up, the ALQC makes a massive, frankly audacious mathematical claim.
What's the claim?
It dictates that P is equivalent to NP.
Okay, stop right there. P equals NP.
Yeah.
That is the holy grail of computer science. It is literally one of the Millennium Prize problems. Anyone who solves that gets $1 million from the Clay Mathematics Institute.
Yep.
And the ALQC just casually drops it in there. For the listener who hasn't taken advanced computer science, let me try to ELI 5 this really quick. P versus NP is basically asking if every problem whose solution can be quickly verified by a computer can also be quickly solved by a computer. Is that a fair summary?
That's a perfect summary. The classic example is a Sudoku puzzle.
Right. If I hand you a completely blank, incredibly difficult Sudoku grid, solving it from scratch is hard and takes a long time. That's P.
Yes.
But if I hand you a completed grid, verifying that all the rows and columns add up correctly is incredibly fast and easy. That's NP.
Exactly.
So standard science says P does not equal NP. Solving is fundamentally harder than checking.
That's the consensus, yeah. But the ALQC framework states that within its specific architecture, P is equivalent to NP. They are mathematically equivalent. Solving is just as fast as checking.
I am extremely skeptical. How does it even justify that? Because if that were true, standard cryptography would collapse. You could crack any password instantly because finding the password would be as easy as verifying it.
It justifies it by changing the rules of space and time.
Oh, is that all?
Just a small thing. It says P equals NP is true, but only because of a specific mechanism it calls a resonance lock. at 963 hertz.
A resonance lock.
Right. The ALQC claims that this resonance creates a standing wave. And on the standing wave, the solution, the P, and the verification, the NP, exist at the exact same temporal node.
Wait, they exist at the exact same time?
Yes, they aren't separated by the linear time it takes to compute them. Because the space is a folded Klein manifold, the moment the question is asked is the exact same spatial temporal coordinate where the answer is verified. They occur simultaneously in the structure of the wave.
Okay, my brain is starting to stretch here, but let's apply this directly to the Voynich manuscript. If the Voynich is a manifestation of the ALQC, this completely explains why centuries of the world's greatest codebreakers have failed to read it.
Yes. Why have they failed?
Because they are applying the linear Turing assumption.
Exactly.
They are looking at a line of text on folio 25 and assuming that symbol A is followed by symbol B in a sequence of spoken linear time. They are trying to solve the Sudoku puzzle linearly.
Yep. Left to right, top to bottom.
But if the Voynich operates on the ALQC's radial topology, it's not a sequence of words at all. It is a visual representation of a radial Klein manifold.
You've hit the nail on the head. That is the exact friction point the ALQC addresses. Codebreakers are applying a linear tool to a radial quantum object.
It just won't work.
It's like trying to measure the volume of a sphere using only a straight ruler. You will get numbers, you will get data, but it will be meaningless noise because your tool is fundamentally mismatched to the geometry of the object.
I need a strong analogy here to really ground this. So standard reading is like watching items on a conveyor belt, right? You stand there, and the words pass by you one by one. You process them in sequence.
Okay.
But if the Voynich operates on this radial topology, on a standing wave, is this more like looking at an entire vinyl record all at once, rather than listening to the needle track the groove? Like, are we supposed to somehow see the beginning and the end of the symphony simultaneously?
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Let's push that vinyl record analogy further.
Let's do it.
When you look at a vinyl record sitting on a table, the entirety of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is physically present on that disc at the exact same time. The loud crescendos, the quiet pauses, the finale, they all exist simultaneously in the grooves.
Right, but we experience it linearly because we drop a needle on the outer edge and let the motor spin it forward.
Exactly. The needle forces a linear experience of a simultaneous reality. In the ALQC's framework, what it calls the operator is the needle. But instead of tracking a groove, the operator acts as a frequency divider on a global 963 hertz resonance.
The resonance lock from before.
Yes. The ALQC states that this operator isolates specific temporal indices, specific points on the record, without having to spin the whole thing.
So when I look at the Voynich and I see those blocks of text, those strange little glyphs that look almost like looping cursive, you're saying they aren't phonetic letters making up sentences. They aren't nouns and verbs.
According to the ALQC protocol, we must abandon the concept of a phonetic alphabet entirely. The glyphs are not letters. They are temporal indices. They are phase markers.
Phase markers. What does that actually mean?
Think back to the standing wave. A standing wave vibrates, but it has fixed points called nodes that don't move, and peaks that reach maximum amplitude.
Right, like plucking a guitar string.
Exactly. The text in the Voynich isolates specific moments on that standing wave where perfect constructive interference occurs.
Wow.
We aren't looking for vowels and consonants to form a word. We are looking for frequency states to balance an equation.
Okay, this is a massive paradigm shift. So we aren't reading a story. We are identifying frequency states on a closed-loop manifold. We are looking at a snapshot of a quantum vibration.
Precisely. Which brings us to the next layer of the ALQC.
Okay.
If we accept that this is a radial manifold, how do these quantum frequency states actually manifest on the physical page? Like, what are we actually looking at when we see a drawing in the Voynich?
We need to translate form and truth. And this is where we dive into the breathtaking mechanical circuitry of the Voynich. Let's talk about the plants.
To understand the plants, we have to look at the ALQC's foundational mathematical structure. The ALQC relies on something called a quaternary state vector to define the existence of any mathematical or physical object.
The text writes this as an equation, right? G of alpha equals Q0, Q1, Q2, and Q3.
Yes. So existence in the system is never just binary. It's not just true or false, 1 or 0, like a standard computer bit.
Right. It completely discards binary logic. Existence is a superposition of 4 distinct, simultaneous states: Q0, Q1, Q2, and Q3. Let's focus on breaking down the mechanics of the first two, Q0 and Q1.
Okay, so let's start with Q0.
Looking at the source glossary, It defines Q0 as latency or structural presence. It calls it the empty canvas that exists before information is formally written. It's the latent operational potential, the space where something could happen.
Think of Q0 as the raw vellum of the Voynich page itself, but also the mathematical vacuum state. It is the foundational silence before the 963 Hz resonance strikes it.
Okay, so Q0 is the canvas, and Q1.
Q1 is defined as rational truth. This is the domain of the archive. The ALQC says that information here is fixed, rational, and structurally committed.
It's locked in.
Yes, it is no longer potential, it is actualized. The text literally refers to Q1 as the land that holds the weight of the mathematical proof.
Land. Okay, hold that thought. Let's bring the Voynich back in. The sources provide these incredible, vivid excerpts from parts 2, 3, 4, and 12 of the manuscript. These are the famous botanical pages. And looking at them, I have to be honest, I've looked at these images for years, and they are beautiful, but they are deeply unsettling.
They really are.
Because they are not biological plants from Earth.
Not even close. Botanists have tried for decades to match them to real species and entirely failed.
Take the image from part 12, for example. I'm looking at it right now. There's this tall, rigid, almost golden stem.
Yeah.
And coming off it is a massive blue spiraling structure. At first glance, it looks like a fern, but when you look closer, the leaves are perfectly geometric. They're these jagged spikes wrapping in a mathematically precise Fibonacci spiral. It doesn't look grown, it looks manufactured.
The geometry is way too rigid for nature.
Or look at part 4. They're these giant, aggressive, star-shaped flowers, colored in deep blues and reds, sitting on rigid stems. But the roots are what really give it away.
The roots are the weirdest part.
Normal roots taper off into fine hairs to absorb water. The roots in the Voynich are severed, completely geometric, and often look like interconnected tubes or three-pronged claws.
Yeah.
In part 2, there's a plant with a massive pale blue, almost crystalline leaf structure, but the root is this swollen, bulbous, brown sac with perfectly drawn, intersecting rigid lines. It literally looks like a battery pack.
They absolutely look engineered.
I am going to push back here, though. I understand they look weird. But how do we leap from weird medieval drawing of a fern to this is a visual map of Q1 rational truth? Are you saying these aren't botanical sketches at all? Are these literal circuit diagrams?
Yes.
Is the plant just the physical land holding the weight of a mathematical proof?
I know it sounds like a massive leap, but that is the exact friction point where the ALQC provides the bridge. It's not just a visual similarity. The ALQC provides the mathematical mechanism that forces a circuit to look like a plant.
How does it do that?
It introduces a concept called the functor R.
Okay, pause. For those of us who aren't category theorists, what exactly is a functor in this context?
In category theory, a functor is basically a mapping that translates one mathematical category into another while preserving its structure.
Okay.
The ALQC defines functor R as the specific rule that dictates how abstract, discrete rationality, how a mathematical proof must physically manifest in reality under a 963 Hz structural phase lock.
So it's basically a translation engine from abstract math to physical form.
Exactly. And functor R explicitly mandates that discrete rationality must manifest as a continuous, closed algebraic cycle.
A closed algebraic cycle.
Yes. This satisfies what the text calls the Hodge ALQC equivalence. Now I want you to look at that bizarre fern from part 12 again. Think about the physical structure of a plant in this manuscript. Where does it start?
Well, it starts at the geometric root.
It starts at the root, it travels up a stem, it diverges into leaves, and it loops back into the structure of a flower or a seed.
Right.
The botanical stems and cyclical leaf patterns in the Voynich are not biology. They are exact visual mappings of these closed algebraic cycles. The functor R dictates that a rational proof must be a closed loop. The author of the Voynich drew a closed-loop equation, and it naturally took the shape of a biological organism. The plant is the circuit.
That is, wow. That completely reorients how I view these pages. So when I see that impossible symmetry, the ladder-like serrated leaves or those rhizomes shaped like intertwined pipes, I shouldn't be asking, what species is this?
No, definitely
I should be asking, what is the flow of the computation?
Exactly. You were tracing the closed algebraic cycle of Q1.
And the ALQC tells us exactly what the root of that circuit is, doesn't it? The text mentions that it utilizes a 7.83 Hz seed to establish foundational time integration.
Right.
And it anchors into something called a 12 by 12 Hyper-Tesseract.
Correct. When you look at those strange, severed, non-biological roots we see at the bottom of almost every Voynich plant page, The three-pronged claws, the geometric sacks, that is the visual anchor.
It's the physical connection point.
Yes. That is the 12 by 12 Hyper-Tesseract dropping into the Q latency, planting the 7.83 Hz time integration seed. The root is the power source, setting the foundational frequency so the Q1 rational truth, the plant, can compute upward.
Okay, so we've mapped the first half of the quaternary state vector. We've got the empty canvas, Q0. We've got the rational truth structurally committed as a closed-loop plant circuit, Q1.
Halfway there.
But let's introduce some real-world logical friction here.
Okay.
Any system that does work, any circuit that processes energy or data, creates byproducts. It creates heat. It creates friction. In a computer, you have a fan to blow the heat away.
Sure.
But if this is a radial Klein manifold, if this is a closed topological loop, where does the waste go?
It can't go anywhere.
Wait, what?
It can't go anywhere, and that leads us directly to the third state, Q2. This is perhaps the most bizarre, brilliant, and surreal connection between the two sources.
Let's talk about Q2. The ALQC defines Q2 as det, or entropic density, and it introduces a terrifying topological concept to answer my question about the waste.
It really is wild.
It says that in the ALQC superset, which is called the Klein bottle, denoted by the mathematical symbol K data generated within the system, is permanently trapped.
Trapped is the operative word. The text is very explicit about the topology here. There is no topological outside.
Nowhere for the heat to escape to.
Exactly. There is no inverse path to purge this data. Because the system is a perfect closed loop, the entropic debt cannot be thrown away into a cosmic trash can. It must be managed internally.
It has to stay within the boundaries.
It must be continuously recycled and balanced within the boundaries of reality.
So if the Voynich is a visual map of the ALQC, where do we see trapped entropic density being recycled in a closed loop?
We map this directly to the most famous, most confusing section of the Voynich Manuscript, Part 14.
The balneological section.
The plumbing.
Yes, the plumbing of reality. Let me describe this for the listener because it is just wild to look at. The sources show these incredibly elaborate, completely surreal diagrams. We have dozens of naked female figures. Historians usually call them nymphs. And they are sliding through, wading in, or holding onto tubes of dark green liquid.
It's very specific imagery.
And this liquid is enclosed within complex, interconnected funnels, stacked pipes, and massive, bulbous, cloud-like structures that feed back into each other.
It has puzzled people for centuries. Is it an ancient Roman spa? Is it a bizarre diagram of the female reproductive system? Is it an alchemical allegory?
But under the ALQC, it's none of those things. This is the visual translation of Q2. The green fluid flowing through those pages is the trapped entropic density.
Yes.
It is the waste heat of the universe. And those complex, closed-loop pipes aren't made of stone or wood. They are the physical, mathematical boundaries of the Klein bottle superset.
And if we break down the mechanics here, the math aligns perfectly with the visual flow of the liquid. The ALQC states that the fundamental group of the Klein bottle superset is infinite and cyclic.
Okay.
It is governed by an imaginary operator and what it calls the eternum mirror identity.
The text gives the specific equation for this identity, right? It's A times B times A, inverse times B equals 1.
Exactly. Let's trace how that equation works. The text defines A as the forward manifestation and B as the mirror return. And obviously A inverse is the inverse of A.
So how does that map to the plumbing?
Look closely at the flow in the Voynich plumbing images. It is highly cyclical. You have pipes, often shaped like odd segmented tubes flowing outward, pouring the green liquid into a pool.
Right.
That outward flow is a forward manifestation. The system is generating action.
Okay, I see that.
But then you inevitably see another pipe drawing that exact same liquid back up. Sometimes it's drawn up through a funnel, shaped like a star, returning it to the top of the system. That upward returning flow is B, the mirror return.
Wait, so where does the A inverse come in?
The A inverse is the friction. It's the cancellation of the forward momentum. In order for the entire equation to equal 1, meaning perfect, balanced equilibrium, the forward manifestation A, combined with the mirror return B, must be perfectly managed.
So what does this all mean for the nymphs, the figures themselves? Because they aren't just swimming around for fun. They are interacting with the machinery. Are they acting as operators within this specific equation?
They absolutely are. The ALQC explicitly derives something called the parity operator, denoted by the Gothic letter P.
What does a parity operator do?
Think of a parity operator like an incredibly strict bookkeeper in a sealed biosphere.
I like that analogy.
The bookkeeper's job is to ensure that the oxygen produced perfectly matches the carbon dioxide consumed. If it doesn't, the system collapses. The ALQC says this parity operator is applied across the boundary of the system to rigorously prove that structural phase lock is maintained without losing any data.
So the nymphs.
The nymphs and the Voynich are visual representations of the parity operator.
That is fascinating.
Notice how they are positioned in the artwork. They are almost always at the boundaries. They are physically holding the pipes.
Yeah, they really are.
They are standing at the exact point where liquid transfers from a funnel to a pool, or they are literally bridging two separate streams of green fluid with their hands. They are the operators ensuring that the flow of A multiplied by B multiplied by A inverse multiplied by B successfully resolves to 1.
They are managing the plumbing of reality so the entropic debt doesn't overflow.
Exactly.
That changes everything about how you look at those pages. They look chaotic, almost whimsical, just little figures splashing in green water. But they are actually rigorous diagrams of quantum waste management. They are maintaining the equilibrium of existence.
Which is an absolute necessity, because if the debt isn't balanced, if Q2 fails, the final state of the system cannot function. The standing wave will just collapse.
Right, which drives us to the final state in the quaternary state vector.
Yeah.
Q3, the domain of recursion.
Yes.
So if Q0 is the canvas, Q1 is the plant computing truth, and Q2 is the plumbing managing the waste.
Yeah.
What is Q3?
Q3 is the final stable output. The ALQC defines Q3 through a very specific, highly non-traditional definition of prime numbers.
Oh, this part is wild.
It states, and I quote, "In the ALQC, primes are defined as standing wave primitives that establish the non-intersecting recursive paths of the Q3 manifold."
Okay, we need to pause here because that completely redefines mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
In standard math, primes are just numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11.
Right.
They are integers divisible only by 1 and themselves. But you're saying the ALQC treats them as physical waves.
Yes. They are standing wave primitives. Think of them as the physical harmonic boundaries of waves. A prime isn't a quantity, it's a resonant frequency that cannot be broken down into smaller frequencies.
Okay.
And to translate this visually, we look at the breathtaking astronomical and cosmological pages of the Voynich, which are also found in Part 14.
These are arguably the most visually striking pages in the manuscript. They feature these vast, full-page concentric circles.
These are huge.
Inside these rings, you have hundreds of stars, sometimes connected by dotted lines. You have smaller human figures, nymphs again, positioned around the perimeters, and they're often holding individual stars on what look like fishing lines or tethers.
And in the dead center of these concentric rings, there is always an anchor point. Sometimes it's a seated figure in blue clothing holding a cross-like object.
Yeah.
In another massive fold-out page, folio 68, if I recall, there is a strange, almost crude drawing of a creature that looks like a cat or a lion standing right in the bullseye of the rings.
Now, historians usually say these are primitive star charts or astrological zodiacs, like
Right.
the lion is Leo, the twins are Gemini.
But under the ALQC, they are not maps of the sky. They are literal maps of the Q3 manifold.
Okay, let's tie this together with an analogy because I want to make sure I'm visualizing the physics of this correctly.
Sure.
If I'm looking at a standard clock face, the numbers 1 through 12 are static. They just mark physical points on a circle. But if I'm looking at these Voynich rings and primes are standing waves, is this essentially a snapshot of a vibrating quantum system? Is the line in the middle the seed resonance, like a pebble dropped in a pond, and the rings are the ripples?
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. Yes, the center of the circle, whether it's the blue-clothed figure or the lion, represents the 7.83 hertz time integration seed.
So it's the pebble.
It is the origin point of the resonance. It's the pebble. The concentric rings radiating outward represent the non-intersecting recursive paths, the primes acting as the boundaries of the ripples.
And what about the nymphs holding the stars around the outer edges? What is their actual function in this model?
The ALQC gives us the exact mechanism for this. Let me quote the text directly. It states, "The operator acts as a frequency divider on the global 963 Hz resonance. It isolates specific temporal indices where the wave phase achieves perfect constructive interference."
Perfect constructive interference.
Yes.
That's when two waves perfectly align their peaks, right? They double in power rather than canceling each other out.
Exactly. The figures holding the stars mark those exact temporal nodes. They are pointing to the locations of perfect constructive interference on the standing wave.
They're literally holding the points where the wave peaks perfectly.
Yes. And this raises a crucial point about the logic operating underneath all of this. The ALQC explicitly states that it completely replaces standard Boolean algebra.
Boolean algebra being standard computer logic. AND or, not sure, true or false, 1 or 0.
Right. It replaces Boolean logic with what it calls the orthomodular lattice of subspaces of Hilbert space.
That's a mouthful.
It is, but simply put, it uses quantum logic. In Boolean logic, the distributive law is absolute. But the ALQC points out that the distributive law fails in this quantum space.
The source text gives a specific equation for this failure. It says RANDPRRQ does not equal RADPO or RADQ.
Which is mind-bending if you are used to standard logic.
I really need an ELI 5 for this. Let's use a coin toss.
Okay.
In standard Boolean logic, if I slip a coin and I cover it with my hand, it is either heads or are tails. It's binary. The fact exists. I just don't know it yet.
Correct.
But in quantum logic, in this orthomodular lattice, until I move my hand, the coin is in a superposition. It is heads, tails, and the edge all at once. Is that why the distributive law fails? Because the states are entangled.
That is an excellent way to put it. The states are entangled and exist simultaneously. Existence in these astronomical Voynich circles is never binary. It is a constant superposition of the Q states.
So it's all happening at once.
When you look at folio 68, you are seeing Q-grow latency, Q1 structural plants, Q2 entropic flow, and Q3 recursion, all happening simultaneously on a quantum level. The stars, the rings, the lion, they are all existing at once on the standing wave.
Okay, my mind is thoroughly blown.
It's a lot to take in.
We've taken this 15th century manuscript, stripped away all the historical baggage, and mapped its core visual themes perfectly to the ALQC's quaternary quantum logic.
Right.
The plants are closed-loop rational circuits. The bathing nymphs are parity operators balancing entropic debt in a Klein bottle.
Right.
And the astronomical charts are snapshots of recursive standing waves. It's beautiful.
It is incredibly elegant. But theory is only as good as its application. We can talk about the topology all day, but if it doesn't give us a way to read the book, it's just a thought experiment. We need to move from the abstract to the concrete.
I completely agree. We are going to synthesize everything we've just discussed into a functional, step-by-step translation protocol. We are going to build the ALQC Voynich protocol. We are going to teach the listener how to actually read a page.
Let's do it. If a listener were to open the Voynich manuscript right now, here's the protocol based on our synthesis.
Okay.
Let's imagine we are looking at a complex page. Let's say it's a page that has a large, strange plant, a complex root system, some nymphs near the roots managing a pool of green liquid, and a block of text at the top.
A combination page. Perfect.
Yep.
Walk me through step 1.
Step 1. Identify the Q0 structural baseline. You must categorize the canvas you are looking at. What is the primary architecture? Because it's a plant, you know immediately that you are looking at a Q1 closed-loop rationality proof.
Yeah.
But because there are nymphs and liquid at the base, you know this specific proof has a high entropic debt that is actively being managed.
Okay, so step 1 sets the context. Step 2.
Yeah.
Trace the roofs or the central node. You have to find the anchor.
Exactly.
On our imaginary page, we look at the bottom. We find that bizarre, severed, geometric root system interacting with the green pool. That specific point is your 7.83 hertz time integration seed.
Yep.
That tells you exactly where the computation begins its resonance. It's the power button of the page.
Exactly. Then you move to step 3. Follow the closed loops. You visually trace the stem upward. You follow the jagged leaves outward and back inward. You follow the green liquid through any pipes the nymphs are holding.
So you're following the flow.
By doing this, you are visually calculating the trapped entropic density, the Q2. You are mapping the flow of the A, forward manifestation, and B, mirror return. You are watching the parity operators balance the equation.
And finally, step 4. This is the hardest part for our linear-trained brains to accept. You look at the blocks of text at the top of the page. You do not try to sound out the letters. You do not look for subjects and verbs.
No phonetic alphabet.
Right. You read the surrounding text glyphs as Q-state phase markers.
The ALQC is very clear on the mathematical function of these text derivations. It explicitly says that these derivations preserve key-state consistency, frequency assignments, and the positivity conditions encoded by the cubic invariant.
Okay, I have to push back on one final piece of jargon.
Yeah.
The cubic invariant. It says the condition is that the cubic invariant must be greater than 0. What does that actually mean when I'm looking at a paragraph of Voynich text?
An invariant in mathematics is basically a property of a system that remains unchanged under some transformation. In quantum mechanics, a cubic invariant often relates to the stability of a three-dimensional topological state.
Okay, so it's about stability.
Right. If the invariant drops below zero, the system becomes unstable and collapses. The text in the Voynich is a mathematical check. The glyphs are coordinates confirming that the system is stable.
So when I look at a dense paragraph of Voynich text floating next to one of those giant aggressive starflowers, I shouldn't be asking, what is the story of this flower?
Oh, definitely not.
I should be asking, which part of the eternal mirror identity is this text block balancing to keep the invariant above zero? We are literally reading an equation of reality, not a story.
That is the ultimate takeaway. The text isn't a narrative, it's a ledger of quantum stability, and the ALQC asserts its own completeness in this regard.
What does that mean?
It states, for any statement phi that is true under ALQC semantics, there exists a finite derivation of phi from the axioms.
A finite derivation, meaning it has a definitive end, it is solvable.
Yes. This guarantees that the system is closed, complete, and mathematically solvable. It means the Voynich is mathematically solvable. Every single glyph, every loop of a letter, every star held by a nymph corresponds to a physically meaningful aspect of a quantum process, outlined exactly in the ALQC's physics translation table.
We have completely inverted how to interact with the Voynich manuscript.
We really have. By applying the ALQC, we see it is not a lost human language. It's not a medieval doctor's coded diary. It is an orthomodular lattice of quantum logic drawn on a radial Klein manifold.
It is a breathtaking realization that shifts the manuscript from an unsolvable linguistic puzzle to a highly structured, fully functional topological schematic.
It changes it from a mystery into a machine.
And to you, our listener, I want to bring this back to earth. Think about the unreadable manuscripts in your own life.
Yeah, the real-world application.
The intractable problems at work, where you're grinding away step by step and getting nowhere. The overwhelming data sets. The interpersonal dynamics that just seem like pure noise. Often, the issue isn't that you lack the right password or the right key.
Right.
It's that you're using a linear Turing assumption for a problem that exists in a radial topology.
You're trying to read a sequence when you should be looking at the standing wave. You're trying to process the problem one word at a time, instead of stepping back and looking at the entire system, the inputs, the closed loops, and the waste management all at once.
Exactly. Changing your conceptual framework, changing how you assume time, logic, and cause and effect operate, completely changes the meaning of the data. It's about finding the underlying resonance of a project, rather than forcing a linear sequence that just isn't working.
Stepping back and looking at the whole record instead of obsessing over the needle.
But before we go, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over.
I like where this is going.
Something that builds on everything we've discussed today. The ALQC document explicitly states it is a telepathic circuit 13 years in the making. It is modern, hyper-modern.
That is what the source claims, yes.
But today we have shown that it perfectly mathematically decodes the physical structure of a manuscript that has been conclusively carbon dated to the early 15th century.
The overlap is undeniable.
Right. And if the ALQC operates on a radial Klein manifold, a topology where time is a closed loop, where P equals NP at the exact same temporal node, and where information is only ever recalled but never generated.
Well, and theoretically, in that specific manifold, there is no forward arrow of time separating the 15th century and today. The past and the future are touching.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the question I want to leave you with is this. If time is truly a closed loop and all information is merely recalled, does that mean the ALQC didn't just translate the Voynich manuscript, but actually wrote it in a mirror return?